Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Celluloid History Life is a Mystery channel. My name is Dan Rowlands. As always, a special welcome to fans of the Kildares, Rebecca Fish Pond, Open Up, and not forgetting Emergency Exit. Yes, indeed. The channel that boldly goes where other current affairs and politics channels fear to tread. The channel that takes your brain to another dimension. So, pay close attention. The channel that, like a 90s 12-inch dance single, takes you higher. The channel that's back by popular demand. Wait a minute, where's my mic stand? Yeah, thanks for joining me this afternoon, this evening, whatever it is, whatever time it is when you're watching the bulletin. It's, me and the production team are grateful to have you with us. Not forgetting the stylist. And I hope you've had a good weekend. It was good to see the world's mightiest footballing juggernaut salvaging a point on Saturday against the mighty Nottingham Forest. So yeah, that was 1 point is better than no points, you know. Anyway, as is my wont. Oh, hang on, I've got a bit. I've not finished my introduction yet. You have to bear with me here. Yes, the channel, the current affairs and politics channel, that is in competition with BBC News at 10, ITV News at 10. Channel 4 News, Channel 5 News, Sky News, Al Jazeera News, BBC Newsnight, BBC Newscast, BBC Question Time, Unspun World with John Simpson, UK Gold, and Comedy Central. Yes, as is my wont, I've been watching the BBC Politics Live show today with Vicky Young, and the guests on the show today were Henry Tufnell MP representing the Labour government, Joe Robertson MP representing the Conservative Party, and Laura Beveridge representing Politics Joe. Towards the end of the show they also had a lady called Gabby Boast, who was a campaigner regarding special needs children's special needs education, the mother of a child with special needs who had trouble getting the correct schooling for her child. So yeah, it was it a bit sort of Monday, slow news, slow politics? There was a few interesting points, a few things. There's one or two topics I've noticed that are sort of recurring, like sort of stock record topics. For example, the wealth tax. That seems, stuff like wealth tax and taxation in general. I suppose it's because the budget's coming up at the end of November, isn't it? Yes. High on the agenda, as you might imagine, was the awful, heinous train knife attack on the Doncaster to London train. Was it on Saturday evening, I believe? Yes. To be quite honest, to my mind, that whole business threw up quite deep and philosophical, linguistic questions regarding the meaning of terror Because you probably noticed the mainstream news outlets were very quick to point out that it wasn't a terror attack, weren't they? I mean, this is the channel that doesn't like to shirk any issues. Essentially, what they're meaning, and this is in no way prejudice towards any religion or race, because after all, there was a problem back in the 80s when I was a teenager. There was a problem with terrorism from the Irish Republican Army, which, thank God, has kind of there's come to some kind of general, I don't know whether it's complete peace, but there's certainly less violence than there was back in the 80s, for example. So anyway, back to the point. What they really meant by it saying that it wasn't a terror attack was it wasn't done on behalf of any Islamic militant group. That would have been the foremost worry on the minds of the authorities, to call a spade a spade. Have I got the energy to go into these? Perhaps not to go into these deep and philosophical, theological points about terrorism and its relationship with theology and religion and life and death, just simple subjects like that. Maybe today is going to be a bit more of a sort of normal sort of news item list bulletin. However, I haven't seen the latest update on the background of the murderer, the train, the attack. Well, he's been charged with 10 counts of attempted murder, hasn't he? So hopefully no one's died. I haven't seen the latest update. So the last update I saw was this morning, I think. The authorities will be very much hoping, to my mind, that the sounds awful, doesn't it? I mean, is there a good type of attempted murder? I mean, but the authorities will presumably be very much hoping that the guy is a kind of lone wolf. Let's use a street term, nutter. Of course, there is better terms for that, psychiatric terms. Violent individual with violent tendencies. Do not approach, etc., etc. Get the tasers out. That's. But you get the point. So I'm sure that the hope will be that will explain this particular heinous incident. A sort of lone wolf, crazy person. But yeah, very unpleasant. And thoughts with the people affected and their family and friends. And as I've made the point before in another bulletin a few weeks back, I think that when these awful things, that's right, is when there was an attack on the Jewish population in Manchester, up near Heaton Park a few weeks back, and I made the point there that these awful incidents, the trauma causes sort of shockwaves, ripple through communities, doesn't it? And etc., etc. We don't. What's that phrase? Who said it? I can't remember who said it, but no man is an island. Stuff you do has a knock-on effect. Not least awful, heinous stuff like that. Anyway, yeah, very bit of a grim subject, but yeah, I'll move on. But yeah, awful story that, wasn't it? And yes, thoughts with all those affected. But I'll move on. They're not easy to talk about some of these subjects, But as this channel has said before, nothing gets resolved if you bury your head in the sand. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, yeah, I mean, there's people talking about, clamping down on knife crime. Apparently, the government, Henry Tufnell, representing the government, pointed out that knife crime has actually come down recently, in recent months, which is obviously good news. There's talk about increasing stop and search powers for police, isn't there? The lady from Politics Joe, what's her name, Laura Beveridge, I think her name was Laura Beveridge, fairly young lady, looks to be about her 20s or something like that, from Politics Joe. She was making the point that stop and search doesn't actually make a huge difference. She was saying that the solution to knife crime lies more with like sort of youth leaders and community workers and things like that, has more of a positive impact on knife crime than stuff like stop and search does. She brought up the old chestnut about how stop and search creates racial tension and stuff. I mean, really, it was a slightly different subject, really, because, as I say, if that was a slightly different subject, because generally they're talking about knife crime carried out by largely young people, isn't it? Who are not insane, who are just, and might be wrapped up in crime and drugs and using violent behaviour, carrying knives, which is a slightly different scenario than someone who is basically of not of sound mind carrying out violent attacks, isn't it? As I say, we don't know exactly what's gone on that with that awful train attack yet, but hopefully some answers will present themselves in due course. Yeah. Anyway, I seem to be getting stuck on that subject, don't I? Yes, reform. I was going to start talking then about the pros and cons of the challenge the police have regarding stop and search controversies. I was going to just dip into the point about how the police are always under a lot of pressure for making sure they don't display prejudice regarding racial groups, aren't they? But I was going to make the point that the dilemma there is, which I've heard pointed out before. Let's say someone's perpetrated a crime and their description is that they're 5'9". They're a 5'9" Asian male wearing a red tracksuit. Now the police in those circumstances are going to start stopping and searching 5'9" Asian males, aren't they, wearing red tracksuits? There's no point in stopping white Caucasian males. There's no point in stopping Caucasian males. So I was going to make the point that one person's, it's a subject that's very vulnerable to manipulation, depending on which side of the, not really a political fence, is it? Depending on which side of the argument you're on, I guess, because sometimes it gets called playing the race card, don't they? I was a bit hesitant to use that phrase because I don't want to come across as though I'm. I don't want to come across as though I'm sort of biased towards the UK police's cause. But the point is that someone who's concerned about what's that term they use to describe this? Racial stereotypes. It's a better term, actually. Anyway, I forgot the term I was going to use, but someone whose campaigners who are concerned about racial stereotyping, saying that all white people are this, or all Asian people are that, or all black people are that. That subject's easily manipulated. Say, well, you can't do stop and why are you only stopping and searching Asian males, or Now, of course, someone who's got a scientific outlook working for the police is going to say, well, they're going to have a more scientific approach, aren't they? They're going to say, well, look, I'm not stopping and searching Asian males because I'm prejudiced. I'm stopping and searching Asian males because the perpetrator of the crime has been described as 5'10" Asian wearing a red tracksuit. You get the point. But depending on how you look at it, it's kind of it's a topic that's sort of, I was going to say malleable according to what your argument is, But it's back to what I was talking about the other day, that we're stuck with the fact that different races do have different colours and different defining features, aren't we? But anyway, moving on. Blimey, time flies when you're having fun. It's 15 minutes gone already. I hope you enjoy whatever you're having for your tea this evening. Yes, I was struck by the fact that Reform seemed to be getting quite a extensive platform on today's BBC Politics Live with Vicky Young. We had Zia Yusuf, the head of Reform policy, waxing lyrical for a good 5 or 10 minutes about Reform economic policy. Fairly surprising given the fact they've only got, either 5 MPs or 6 MPs out of over 600 in total in the House of Commons. You could say that they get a disproportionate amount of platforming, considering the fact they're a very minor party with hardly any MPs. The only thing I would say is that I did notice that when Sarah Poaching from Reform Party the other day sparked off that controversy about saying, there's, according to her mind, there was too many black and Asian faces on UK TV advertising, which was unrepresentative of the UK population. That the fallout from that story did, in my view, see a fair amount of critique towards Reform from, I'm mainly judging it from the BBC, but from what you might call the big mainstream channels, your BBCs, your ITVs, your Channel 4s, your Channel 5s. It did seem to sort of create a situation where there was a fair amount of sort of questioning of Reform, and what drives them, what motivates the party, sort of thing, But I would say that, but that aside, I mean, to my mind, it is fairly eyebrow raising the amount of platforming Reform, how seriously they get taken as a I mean, I know they're ahead in the polls, but that's a totally different kettle of fish than actually being voted in, isn't it? Anyway, that's my opinion, but I accept I accept that reportedly they're polling very well, but yes, so Zia Yusuf was saying that he was describing Rachel Reeves as being like a drunken sailor at the tiller of the ship of the UK economy, doesn't know what she's doing, according to Zia Yusuf. And I mean, to my mind, I found it pretty galling, was that Zia Yusuf, head of Reform policy, was also waxing lyrical about the ins and outs of what constitutes severe anxiety, psychiatric illness of severe anxiety, and what constitutes mild anxiety, which is mild anxiety of such a nature that in his view it doesn't warrant people being off work. And he even made the claim, to which Vicky Young wasn't really, I'm not saying she showed evidence of agreeing with everything that Mr. Yusuf was saying, but she wasn't exactly being the most inquisitive of interviewers either. Sort of, it was almost like it came across as a kind of mainstream accepted thing to sort of question the clinical condition of anxiety on lunchtime TV on the BBC with a member of Reform, which to my mind is fairly controversial. I mean, Mr. Yusuf even included a claim, some figures he included. He reckoned that 80% of people who were getting PIP benefits for anxiety have anxiety that is not severe enough to warrant them being off work. That's quite some claim, isn't it? So he's saying that 4 out of 5 people have been signed off work with anxiety and are claiming PIP, and 4 out of 5 of them should be at work. And he was saying that they're, you know, and furthermore, that'll be the cure for their anxiety. Now, I think Mr. Yusuf, unless he's a qualified psychiatrist, and unless Vicky Young's a qualified psychiatrist as well, they ought to be very careful about discussing things like that. In my view, in my opinion, discussing psychiatric conditions on sort of daytime telly, you know, especially on programs that are in competition with stuff like This Morning, you know. And ITV used to have programs like Jeremy Kyle show, didn't they? So you turn over and you've got like someone passing judgment on what clinical anxiety is and what it isn't, you know, from Reform and from the BBC. It's not great. It's a matter for the psychiatric profession, basically. And yes, I mean, I feel quite strongly about this sort of thing because I've worked for many years of my working life's been checkered, but the industry I've worked in most of my working life has been healthcare, you know. So yeah, unless you're a qualified psychiatrist, head of Reform policy, I mean the Tories are fond of that, saying that, or going down that road as well. But I mean they're basically aping the Reform a lot anyway, aren't they? But and to his credit, Henry Tufnell, representing the government, did quite a good job today, I thought, because he was very much making the case that the government's view, which I thought was quite commendable of him to point out, actually, the government's view on anxiety and other disabling conditions is that you know, reform of the welfare system, if and when it does happen, which is, I believe it obviously is needed by all accounts, it will involve the prioritising the needs of vulnerable people rather than prioritising cutting costs. And I say here to that, you know. I mean, to be honest with you, later in the show, there was a mother of a special needs child who was pointing out how the whole system, including applying for PIP benefits, I mean, her particular scenario was applying for the right type of school for her special needs child, which she said was like, you know, a nightmare. Like, she said it made her doing a dissertation that she was doing look like child's play, you know, the process of filling out the forms and getting all the evidence. And she said the whole thing needs total overhaul because it's virtually impossible to sort of, you know, you have to have a sort of PhD in sort of diplomacy and subterfuge and intrigue in order to fill out a PIP form, sort of thing, you know. Which yeah, I mean, they don't make it. It seems to, in my experience, they don't make those things easy, do they? You know, but anyway, back to the point about at least this guy Henry Tufnell from the government, representing the government, pointed out that the priority is you know, looking after vulnerable people, whereas I think it's arguably, I don't want to make sweeping generalizations. I'd rather back up points with cold hard facts, because I wouldn't claim that every single member of the Conservative Party is a heartless however, generally speaking, the political theory that is behind the policies that Conservatives and certainly I would say the Reform Party develop, generally speaking, the thinking behind their policies, economic policies, generally boils down to sort of, you know, dog eat dog world. You know, they always like to sort of play it as though, you know, life is about, you know, you've got to get off your backside and all, you know, and as Norman Tebbit used to say, get on your bike. However, you know, one man's you know, it's a bit of a grey area, isn't it? One man's get on your bike, you lazy doodah, is another man's, you know, life's hard, mate, tough cheese, you know, survival of the fittest. That is generally the reason why I lean more towards ideas of social democracy than I do towards ideas of survival of the fittest, basically. I mean, you can get into arguments about what, you know, what the meaning of life, you know, just like simple stuff like that, kitchen sink stuff like that. What's the meaning of life, you know? You know, are humans a social animal, or do we have to resign ourselves to the fact that we're carnivorous, competitive, predatory, you know, apes, that, you know, tribal apes that are predisposed to conflict and fighting, you know? Are we that, or are we you know, social creatures, sentient, intelligent, on two legs, capable of imagining the future and learning from the past? You know, it's like, I suppose the latter is kind of more of a kind of what you might call a progressive way of looking at things, whereas the former, the sort of acceptance that in the main, you know, where humans are carnivorous animals with canine teeth, and they're prone throughout history to fighting and prone to competitive behaviours. That's more of a sort of, those traits are, I believe, for me, those traits have to be acknowledged, but that's, dare I say, if those traits are born in mind and the understanding can arise that they can be controlled, you can then concentrate more on the latter side of human nature, can't you, which is an ability to create our own futures and as a race, you know, and you know, in harbour constructive ideas and which promote contentment and quality of life, you know. It sort of boils down to, in my mind, stuff like, you know, the idea of ideally the human race needs to sort of utilize stuff like currency, utilize money for positive ends, rather than we need to, you know, human race needs to control money rather than allowing money to control the human race. Because if you have an outlook, say like Trump seems to have, you could argue that it's that the Trumpian outlook seems to sort of be, you know, sort of resignation to the fact that money makes the world go round, whereas a progressiveness, kind of, to my mind, is more about, you know, what, but it sounds, don't want to say never trust a hippie, don't they? But resignation to the fact that love makes the world go round, or you could say maybe the human race makes the world go round, and, you know, money is just a tool that the human race uses, you know. Yeah, so yeah, the channel that doesn't like to shirk the big issues, you know, like solving the meaning of life and things like that, you know, just while we're at, along with all the other kitchen sink subjects, you know. Blimey, time flies. We're approaching half an hour already. Yeah, sorry, I was just waxing lyrical there a little bit about progressive politics, as I've repeated a few times on these bulletins before. I'm consider myself a social democrat, you know, and yeah, Not got through many of my points today, but I'll just wrap it up. We've just gone past the 30-minute mark, so there's no reason on earth why I shouldn't start thinking about wrapping up the bulletin. I'm pretty sure that the channel will be back tomorrow, so have a great Monday evening, everyone. Start of the week. Have a happy Monday. Sorry if I hope that imaginary symbol sound was cut the mustard there. Trying to think what I wanted to wrap it up with at least one more point. Just bear with me a second. Yeah, I mean, I will wrap it up, but I did notice that yeah, one thing I noticed is that how regularly Keir Starmer gets the Prime Minister gets accused of being weak by the Tories, he gets accused of being weak by Reform. You know, you could say, well, you know, he's so weak he became Prime Minister. You know, I mean, I know there's controversy even within his own party about how he's quite controlling stuff. I mean, I've heard rumours that he's made it very difficult for himself to be sort of ousted, you know, which may or may not be true. I don't know the details, but I have heard rumours that he's made it quite difficult for anyone from the Labour Party to oust him. There's part of me that just thinks, well, hey, that's politics, that's the game they're in. But I was thinking, yeah, that it does seem that there does seem to be a consensus in current affairs and politics at the moment, which illustrates how much things have shifted to the right. I think it's infiltrating mainstream media. You know, the sort of default position being having shifted to the right. Really, things like well, I mean, you know, I can only presume that today Vicky Young didn't seem to think it was particularly controversial discussing the ins and outs of clinical anxiety with a member of Reform on lunchtime TV. I mean, and quite, you know, the implying that there's people out there who were just who were just lazy and not really anxious, and they're not qualified to make those judgments, quite frankly. Her and Zia Yusuf from Reform, and I think that sort of thing would have been called out 10, 20, 30 years, well, certainly 20, 30 years ago. I think that sort of thing would have been called out quite quickly. So, you know, you can't possibly be talking about clinical psychiatric matters on a chatty show at lunchtime, as though you're an expert on it. And there seems to be this sort of default position that you know, there's a lot of talk about the richest. There's a lot of talk about who's the richest person in the world these days, isn't there? Musk and stuff, and how the billionaires have all got like 1% of the. 1% of billionaires have got all the wealth in the Western world, and everybody else. There's a lot of there's a kind of new default where they're making a bit of a god out of money. I've noticed in the media, right? You know, we're all sort of inferior to Elon Musk on some scale, you know. Now, do you remember back in the 80s, there were films like Wall Street, starring Michael Douglas, weren't there? I'm going to wrap it up because it's 34 minutes, but and he played a character, didn't he, Gordon Gekko, that had a catchphrase that greed is good. Now, so there were characters in the 80s that were sort of ruthless capitalists, of course, back in the 80s. And there certainly is now, aren't there? Ruthless capitalists around, very much so. The Trump and your Musks, etc., etc., etc. But back in the 80s, I remember that the idea that the sort of catchphrase "greed is good" was, by most right-thinking people, it was kind of accepted that no, greed's not good. Really, deep down, everyone thought the default position was that no, greed's not good. I mean, I don't want to start getting on like saying I'm some sort of religious lunatic or anything like that, but it's one of the 7 deadly sins, etc., etc. And whereas these days it seems to be the default position when they're talking about economic policy and the upcoming budget and taxation and stuff, it does seem to be the default position that that money is a bit of a god. Like the idea that Starmer's weak because he's they think that he's not ruthless like Gordon Gekko. He won't tell everyone to get on their bike and get a job because he's not strong enough. That seems to be almost like an acceptable thing for the mainstream to sort of think. Whereas, as the guy from Henry Tufnell did a good job today, I thought, God bless him, said today, well, no, the idea of what is the idea of life? Quality of life, isn't it? And what's the idea of life if you suffer from anxiety? It's not being anxious in it, needing treatment, and not working if you're too anxious to work and stuff like that. And furthermore, the person who's qualified to judge your anxiety is a psychiatrist under the supervision of a consultant psychiatrist. It ain't Vicky Young and it ain't Zia Youssef, is it? Anyway, I'm going to wrap up because I don't want to go too long there, and I'm sorry if it's come across as a bit of a serious hue today regarding heinous violence on trains and psychiatric diagnoses. However, there we go. This is a channel that doesn't want to shirk issues. The most cutting edge, yet ad hoc, laid back current affairs and politics channel in the UK. We'll be back tomorrow. Hope everyone has a good night, and always remember, I saw Mr. Farage today doing a speech about economics. Always remember, in order to make your points come across with more emphasis, always slow down the words that you're saying towards the end. Have a good night, everyone. Good night.
Don't give me no back talk, sucker. Don't give me no back talk, sucker. Don't give me